All righty, let's go ahead and get started then. I think we've probably got just about everybody on the call now. So first of all, I want to thank you all for coming and joining us on this webinar this afternoon. It's always great to get together and have a conversation, especially over lunchtime, and talk about some of the things that are top of mind for a lot of our security leaders, top of mind for a lot of CISOs and even executives these days. And so I'm here together working with my friend Tom Schmidt. My name is Zach Warren. I'm the Chief Security Advisor for Tanium here in EMEA. And Tom is joining me. And Tom, if you want to give a quick introduction to yourself, and then we'll get this thing kicked off.
Thanks, Zach. Hello from my side as well. Tom Schmidt, leading cybersecurity in Switzerland at the EY, and also being part of the European leadership. And looking forward to today's presentation and discussion with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Me as well. And so what I'd like to first do is let everybody know that we have a Q&A section that's open. If anything comes up that you have a question around that you want to throw over to Tom and myself, feel free to get that into the Q&A section, and we'll answer it as best we can, either in line, or we'll do a little bit of a Q&A section towards the end of our call here. So what we wanted to discuss today is Tom and I work closely with a lot of CISOs, and we help organizations develop and improve their overall security profile and their security posture. And so question we asked is the biggest risk the one that you can't see coming? Because we talk so much about all these types of detection and countermeasures, but what about all the things that we could be preventing? So I wanted to jump straight into this conversation with a talk track that I like to share with organizations that are looking at improving their overall security posture. For me, it is about understanding cybersecurity, understanding what we should be doing to improve our organizations and how we can be strategic about it and really get into these topics. So first of all, we all recognize that there are different types of security priorities out there for us. We've all got those legacy platforms that we would much rather just smash with a hammer and throw out the window than have to take care of and constantly, watch after them and patch them and all these things. Total pain, a lot of the legacy platforms that we have in our environments. On top of that, we'll get into this a little bit with Tom, but there's all kinds of compliance and regulatory demands of our organizations today. Tom and I are supporting organizations on a regular basis when it comes to NIS2 and DORA. And Tom will talk a little bit more about that in more detail. And then thirdly, this IT estate just continues to grow. There's just more and more services and devices in our environments. And because this growth, we have more and more attack vectors and more risk in our environments. I think most of you can probably relate to this picture in one way or another. There's just so many devices out there. There's so much data out there, so many users in our environments. And I have to remind people that it's not your fault, right? This type of architecture was developed over years and years and years of people trying to do the right thing with the right technology. But really what it came down to was a lack of visibility. How many times have you been in an organization where you said, hey, can someone show me a network diagram of what we actually have? And a couple of people might go up, trust themselves or be bold enough to go up to the whiteboard and break out with a marker and start to try to draw it. But one of the things that we as people are really bad at is documentation. And so because of that, we've developed these environments where there is no visibility. And as an attacker, as somebody that's looking at how to get into an organization, they really don't care where they go or how they get in. They really don't care how they, what kind of backdoors they have, what kind of social engineering they're able to do. They're just looking for the easiest, smoothest way to get into an organization. And one of the kind of jokes that I always tell is, well, how fast do you have to be to outrun a bear, right? You only have to be faster than the guy next to you. And it's the same thing here with being attacked by these bad actors. You have to be in a position of understanding your environment, seeing what it looks like to an attacker, and then trying to close as many of those gaps and vulnerabilities. So I want to talk a little bit about the preparation and countermeasures that go into improving your overall security posture. There's three things that I see that organizations need to continue to develop and work on to be able to be more secure, to be able to be more prepared for an eventual breach. First of all is visibility and control. Many organizations don't have the visibility and control that they need. When I talk about visibility and control, keep in mind that most organizations that I work with, they only are aware of about 70 to 80% of their overall estate. That means 20 to 30% of their estate is shadow IT, and they don't know what's actually there. Talk about a very important component of your security posture. Second is the control of those devices. It's one thing to be able to see them, a whole nother thing to be able to actually control them and patch them and keep them up to speed. The second thing I like to discuss is continuous safeguarding, making sure that organizations are continually measuring themselves, making sure that they're getting better and better. Are we better today than we were 6 months ago? Do we have the right security controls in place? Right? These are the things that we need to be looking at. And third, my favorite component of a good cyber program is detection and countermeasures. And we'll get into this a little bit deeper, but it really goes closely together with the visibility and control in my first point. So let's jump into visibility and control real quick. First of all, you need good asset discovery. And the question is always, how many of my assets do I need to be able to see to be able to say that I have good asset discovery? And that can kind of vary based on your risk, appetite. But in the best way possible, or let's say in the nirvana of IT asset discovery, you want to be able to see all of your devices, every single thing that's on your environment that comes and goes and how that data flows, because you can only protect what you know. You can't protect what you can't see, right? And second is once you're able to see all these devices, how confident are you in the control of each of these devices? So as an example is, if you've discovered a device and you discover that it has malicious malware on it, how confident are you that you can remove it? If you've discovered that multiple devices have an old vulnerable piece of OS on them, how confident are you that you can get all of those patched? Especially when it's in a breach situation, you have to sniper patch things. And finally, identify those critical assets. None of us have a ton of money. Sometimes I talk about Jamie Dimon spending $20 million on, JP Morgan Chase's cybersecurity program, but that's only 6% of his budget. So really, is he able to fully focus on his most important assets and protect those critical assets with only 6% of his budget? So we need to spend as much as we can of our time and effort on really protecting those critical assets. Ask yourself, what are we actually in the business of doing? And what type of data and what applications do we absolutely need to be able to be resilient if we're breached? Those are your critical assets, and make sure that you protect them as much as possible. So where do we start? I like to talk about different programs that you can establish in your organization. Here's just a few examples. Develop a good asset lifecycle program. Make sure, for example, that you're improving your CMDB. You've got to be able to trust your CMDB, because no matter what you have, if you're going to go roll out some impressive new technology like EDR, XDR, things like that, which are great things to have, you need to make sure that your CMDB is clean so that you can have a great rollout, so that you can make sure that those agents are on all your devices, not just 70%. And second, make sure we're doing authentication and authorization programs. Multi-factor authentication is not a heavy lift anymore. You can do these things and get multi-factor authentication put into place. And also vulnerability management, right? Because if we understand where our vulnerabilities are and we can patch those and we can turn them into strengths, then we know that we're going to be in a better position to protect ourselves. And all of this that I'm talking about here is something that needs constant care and feeding. There's no such thing as set it and forget it if you want to be ready. So when it comes to these things, there's questions that I love to ask IT leaders. And I personally think that we need to be able to speak to all of these things and answer all of these questions. Out of these 4 questions, go ahead and read through them on your own. But out of these 4 questions, for me, the one that I think is so interesting and so important is, what do we look like to an attacker? We need to make sure that we're doing plenty of work to be able to understand that question and be able to answer that question to our IT leaders. So the next thing I'd like to talk about is continuous safeguarding. This is all about measurement. How do I get better? How do I get stronger? So first of all, we need to understand who our powerful users are. As a red teamer in the past, one of my favorite things to do was to get valid credentials from somebody that's been at the organization for a very, very long time. Why is that? Because those are powerful users that have access to lots of different things that they never took that access away. It's called least privilege, right? So if you have that access, then you can move laterally around the environment and do all kinds of things, wreck all kinds of machines and devices and cause all kinds of problems. So we need to get an eye on that. Second, close those vulnerabilities. Nobody has any warm, cozy feelings when they start to think about patching. We all hate patching. But the thing is, it's not, the most exciting thing to do, but it is so essential to close those vulnerabilities. And finally, if we are closing those vulnerabilities, if we're able to become more and more compliant, right? And Tom will talk a little bit about this with the NIS2 and DORA. If we can increase our compliance, then we're also going to increase how difficult it is to attack us. The more difficult it is, the faster you can run away from that bear, the more money and time and effort the bad actors have to spend to get into your environment. And if they have to spend too much time and too much money, then they're going to go and attack someone else. They're going to go after that slower person, and that's where the bear is going to be fed. So make sure that we're looking at these things. Now, where do we start with this? Let me talk about a couple different programs that I think will enable your organizations to have a more comprehensive continuous safeguarding program. So first of all, we need to be doing more war games. Tabletop exercises can move the needle. I've done multiple tabletop exercises where I've then taken my findings and the outputs of those exercises, showcased them to the C-level, and gotten more budget for security that way. We need to look at active threat hunting. How much control and visibility do we have of our environment so that we can actually go after the bad guys actively and not just be a victim to their aggressions towards us? And second, I know it's not something sexy and fun, but we need to make sure that patch management is in place. Automate as much as you can. And I've had lots of very varied conversations and debates even about, do you patch all the low-hanging fruit, simple things, or do you first patch all the difficult things and make sure that those things are automated? Look at your organization, understand your organization, and figure out ways to automate your patching. So, and again, with these things, there is no set it to forget it, right? So what key questions do I want to be asking when I'm talking about continuous safeguarding? Again, are security controls present and effective, right? Where does our data come from? Where is it stored, right? Understanding where those critical assets are is extremely important. My favorite out of these 4 is, are our teams properly trained? And do they speak a common language? To me, the team is everything. Got to make sure that our teams work well together and can communicate openly and have great data, great sets of data that they're working from. Otherwise, you're going to be getting this kind of, butting heads between, IT ops and security teams and risk and compliance teams. The security team is going to want something patched because it's very relevant for them in a breach, whereas maybe the IT ops team doesn't see it as a priority. So are we sharing the right data? Do we have the right visibility of these things? And finally, detection and countermeasures. This is where we really get into the fun stuff of cybersecurity. That's finding the bad guys and stopping them from what they're doing. But let me ask you this. Today, in your organizations, how confident are you in your ability to detect when an endpoint has been compromised, or if you have suspicious behavior in your environment? If you don't feel confident, if you don't feel like you can stop suspicious behavior in your environment, then there's work to do in this environment. There's work to do here. Visibility and control are going to give you this confidence to be able to detect these things. So if you go back to my previous point and you build those type of programs, then the detection will become easier and easier, and you'll be more and more confident because there won't be any of that, shadow IT. And second, again, is response. You want to be able to have the control to be able to respond based on whatever your remediation actions should be based on the breach, right? So if that's, doing quarantines, if that's running patches, whatever that is, custom scripts, you need to also have the confidence that when you respond, you'll be able to push out whatever those remedial actions are out to all of your devices, right? And not leave any gray space there. Now, the thing about confidence in these things is there's been multiple times in my experience where I found that bad actors have been in an environment for a very long time because nobody detected them. The one that shocked me the most was I was doing some work for an organization where we were doing some scanning. I was actually utilizing Tanium before I came to this, years before I came to Tanium. And with Tanium, I was able to find a bad actor, well, a backdoor that had been used for many, many years. And I wound up doing the forensics on it and found that they had been utilizing this backdoor for close to 11 years. 11 years that this organization has been attacked, and they did not detect it once until we came in and we did an assessment for them. So these things are very, very near and dear to my heart. We got to have the ability to be able to detect. So where do we start with detection and countermeasures? First of all, your incident response plan. If I was in front of you guys in person, I'd ask you, raise your hand. How many of you have and understand your incident response plan? So many organizations say that they have these, but then when you go and you do a tabletop exercise, like I talked about with the measuring, you find that a lot of them are, 600 pages or not many people know exactly what their roles and responsibilities are there. And second, do regular pen testing. Make sure that you're identifying these weak spots so that you're not being exploited, right? And again, with the questions, I love having questions around this topic, but for brevity, because we need to get moving, I want to just share this one with you at the very bottom. Can our team walk anyone through our incident response plan? For me, that's a huge question. Can we all openly communicate about what our roles and responsibilities are and how we communicate about a breach? Because if you don't practice that, if people don't know what their roles are, when you are breached, everybody's hair catches on fire and everybody runs around, without really knowing what they're supposed to be doing and how they're supposed to be focused. So get those things in line the best that you can. So my 3 takeaways here are, let's improve our visibility and control. Let's continue to monitor and safeguard our environments. And thirdly, let's make sure that our detection and countermeasures are in place. And if we can do these 3 things, we'll be in a whole different place and we'll be ready for breaches, and we'll be more prepared for how to respond to them. All right, thank you very much. I appreciate you spending the time with this. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it on over to Tom. So Tom, over to you, my friend.
Yeah, thank you very much, Zach. Thanks a lot for the intro on that important topic. So hopefully you do most or all of that what Zach has just explained already from a pure risk perspective. That would be the ideal situation, obviously, knowing of the risk and then implementing the measures that are needed. But sometimes risk alone or risk perspective is not the only dimensions are good enough. There also comes in compliance. And that's what I would like to cover in the next couple of minutes. So more the compliance angle. And as Zach said, probably no one gets really warm and cozy feelings with patching. That's probably also similar to being compliant or when we talk about compliance. Nevertheless, it's important, and we see more and more regulation coming up when we talk about operational resilience and cyber resilience, obviously being part of that. And therefore, I would like to give a quick overview on what is coming up or what is currently in the implementation phase from a NIS2 and DORA perspective. Next slide, please. Good. So it might be a bit confusing as we have those 2 requirements that are coming from the European side, which is the NIS2 and the DORA. it seems to be somehow similar, but not the same. So what is the difference, and why do we have those two different frameworks, basically, from a compliance perspective? So firstly, having a quick look at NIS2. NIS2 is elevation of the NIS that was already in place for a couple of years now. It's a network and information security that for NIS is standing. And now that's the second version, basically. And the purpose of that directive from the European Parliament is to increase the level of cyber resilience to businesses that operating in the EU, which fulfill important functions for the economy and society. So it's not all the companies within EU that need to be compliant to NIS2, but there is a quite bunch of companies that need to follow that directive. It's about reducing inconsistencies in resilience, as we have seen that in the past throughout the European Union, that this was been handled quite differently, and an improve of the level of joint situational awareness and collective capabilities to respond to incidents. There are different obligations in NIS2, which are the pillars, basically. It's about risk analysis, information systems, security policies, incident handling, but then also business continuity, supply chain security, security in network and information system, as it is called, Network and Information Security Directive, obviously, then testing and auditing and use of cryptography and encryption. That seems to be similar, and is in parts of it also similar to DORA, as we'll see later on. And the scope, as said, it's those important, the businesses with important functions to the economy and society. And you have a couple of examples here. So digital suppliers, food production, processing, distribution of food, manufacturing, postal services. So quite a range of sectors which are considered to be important businesses. It was finally introduced by end of 2022. The publication officially was then the 27th of December 2022, came into force January 2023, and needs to be applied by the 17th October of 2024. Next slide, please. If we have a look at DORA, which is the Digital Operational Resilience Act of the European Parliament, which has similar topics that needs to be covered, but we are talking here about the financial industry. So it's about the financial industry. Examples of it are banks, asset managers, insurance companies, but also their providers. And that's in addition what you normally see in local market regulation. If you take the financial services regulator in different markets, quite often it's geared to the banks and insurance companies, but not necessarily to the providers, so to the cloud providers, for example. With DORA, also those ICT providers are included in that framework and need to adhere to the requirements from DORA. Obviously, it's also about operational resilience at the end, being part of the overall resilience of the enterprise and a specific focus on ICT and cyber-related topics. There is also some reasoning for that, obviously, the increasing risk due to cyber attacks that we have seen in the past, no harmonized EU minimum standard available, high dependency on ICT third-party providers, also cyber attacks that are coming through those third-party providers. And it's a combined situation of the supervision bodies in the European Union, so the EU supervisory authorities like the EBA, the ESMA, the EIOPA, so banking and insurance is covered from a regulatory perspective. And from a date perspective, it's similar to NIS2. So it was published at 27th of December 2022. It was put into force also in January 2023. And the companies or the banks, insurance companies have a little bit more time to put that in practice or to get prepared. So it needs to be applied by the 17th of January 2025. So why do we have those two acts or regulations that are coming from the EU. Next slide, please. It's not the same. Huh? What is the main difference between DORA and NIS2? NIS2 and DORA don't share the same objectives, but they have similarities. So NIS2 really aims to strengthen the global level of cybersecurity within the EU, where DORA is around integrity and availability of critical important function systems and data for the financial sector. So it's really sector-specific DORA. NIS is much broader, NIS2. The NIS2 is a European directive, so it needs to be translated into national law, which needs to be done by each member state. It's not per se the law, it needs to be first transposed, translated into national law, and this must be done by the 17th of October 2024. DORA, on the other side, is a European regulation. There is no need that this is transposed into national law. It counts for all the EU countries from 17th of January 2025. NIS and DORA do not target the same entities. So in NIS2, we are talking about essential entities and important entities. DORA is financial sector and their providers. And DORA is lex specialis because of the situation that it is targeting the financial sector, of the NIS for the financial sector, basically. So it's more important from a financial sector perspective, but obviously it's aligned to the ground principles of NIS2. Next slide. As you can imagine, it's not that easy to comply with all that regulation. If we have a close look to DORA, there are 5 topics that need to be covered. The domains that you see here in the top, so it's the ICT risk management, ICT incident management, resilience testing, third-party risk management, and information sharing. Not all of them are mandatory. The first 4 are mandatory. Information sharing is a bit optional from that perspective. But you also see the hot topics in each of those domains at the end. So the development of a common framework for risk management at group level, for example, establish of uniform standards, centralization of reporting processes, but then also the testing activities that need to be performed either internally or externally on a period basis as well. And then the handling of the third party that the companies are dealing with, obviously. So a lot that needs to be taken into consideration. And if you go to the next slide, there are some specific challenges. And it's only now from an ICT risk management perspective, for example, the ICT asset management. And that very well aligns to what Zach was explaining with the visibility of your infrastructure, of your system, which is key here, that you can perform a meaningful ICT asset management and that you know which assets are in place for your critical business functions. It's about the compliance roadmap that you need to come up, and these important functions, the critical business functions, which need to be aligned with all the measures you are obviously taking to protect them. If we go to the next slide, you see how that maps together. So you have the critical business functions and then the process that are contributing to those functions, the application layer, then the infrastructure layer, and maybe third parties which are connected to some of the infrastructure, be it a cloud provider, for example, or another outsourcing provider. And to have this visibility and that overview, it's really important to understand what you have from an infrastructure and application perspective in your network. And therefore, this visibility and control is of great importance, that you're even able to fulfill that requirement from an ICT asset management mapping perspective. Next slide. Just to give you understanding what is a critical or important business function, you have a couple of examples here. It might be the authorization payment transactions, IT operations, daily regulatory reporting. So that was based on a survey that was done with financial entities to understand what they have clarified or what they have classified as important functions in their business. So there are a lot of business processes which are critical from a banking insurance perspective. And for that, you fully need to understand what is the underlying application, the underlying infrastructure, and the third parties providing their services for those critical functions. Next slide. DORA is a little bit tricky because it's a moving target, basically. While it was introduced in January 2023, in those 2 years transition period until it's finally put into force, more and more clarity comes along with the regulatory technical standards. So the regulatory technical standards are explaining what exactly is needed in more detail to be compliant with the DORA Act. And based on that, the company is currently implementing those requirements. Obviously need to have an eye on those changes which is coming in with the RTS and the ITS to make sure that they are fully compliant to those specific requirements. So there are some guidelines that are provided by EU with the implementing technical standards, so some templates as well, but this needs to be taken into consideration through the implementation phase. Next slide. So what should be considered from a DORA perspective? The critical important functions need to be defined. It's necessary to come up with an ICT risk framework. Then testing needs to be performed. So also pen testing activities, for example, for the infrastructure and applications. Critical ICT third-party status needs to be clarified. The governance needs to be established and the incident reporting as well defined. So a lot of different specific requirements that need to be taken care of. Some of the financial institutions might already have something in place in one or the other way because of national regulatory bodies where they needed to comply in the past, but these are the main aspects that need to be taken into consideration to implement DORA. Next slide. How can be done that? Obviously, from a technology perspective, as said, this visibility and control, and as we called it, the managed visibility and control is an important factor. So asset discovery and inventory is a very important function that needs to be performed, and Tanium is providing the products that can be used for exactly doing that, with building the CMDB, with having an understanding of the technology that is in use at the financial institutions and applications. And then obviously based on that, having visibility also in vulnerabilities that are around for those technologies, being able to do timely patch management and software management, and therefore also being compliant with the requirements from a technical perspective that are imposed by DORA, but also by NIS2. Next slide. With that, we are coming to end with the quick overview of new regulations that are coming up or are currently in the implementation phase. Obviously, we are here to take any questions right now. If you would like to get a bit more knowledge about how you can manage, obviously, the visibility and control in your environment, we are absolutely happy to provide additional insights with the QR code that you see here. You can enroll yourself for half an hour session with myself to dig deeper into that subject and to see where you are on your journey when it comes to DORA or NIS2, and how this can be best addressed going forward, that you are going to be compliant by the date when it is necessary and those regulations are coming into place. With that, opening up the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Tom. Actually, got a couple questions here, and these are really interesting. I think you touched on this a little bit, but maybe to just hit that a little bit harder is, with the DORA regulation, is this limited to banks and insurance companies and their service providers, and is it just the EU? What does that look like? You mentioned that a little bit earlier, but wanted to maybe have you hit that again.
Yeah, it's definitely EU territory, and it's really geared to the financial institutions. It's quite a list of what business exactly in financial services is covered by DORA or needs to comply with DORA. It's a list of 21 entries in, but the main aspects, all the banking, all insurance, all asset managers, and similar providers of financial services are covered with that, and the providers, which is really important aspect. But obviously for companies, banks and insurance companies not being directly in EU, they might think of the situation. It's definitely not impacting myself, right? For example, Switzerland, where I'm located, a Swiss bank might be of the belief this is not relevant for me or insurance company. That's only true if the financial institution is not serving people living in the EU space. So as soon as people are served in EU, in one of the EU countries that are residents there, also the Swiss banks and the insurance companies need to follow the DORA regulation. So similar as to GDPR. It's also extra terrestrial where this is applicable, basically.
Yeah, it's interesting because I just recently had a conversation with an organization in the UK where they said, "Oh, I don't need to worry about NIS2 and DORA." And as we actually got into what their business is, who their customers are, the relationship of, you could even call it the supply chain that they're a component of. They absolutely do need to be interested in NIS2 and DORA and looking how they can become more compliant for that. So yeah, absolutely. Appreciate you answering that. There was another one that came in that I thought was quite interesting. And I'd love to see or hear your insights on this personally, because I talk to a lot of organizations that I personally don't believe are, how can I put this nicely, are not putting the right level of priority around NIS2 and DORA. When you look at the current market status right now regarding implementing NIS2 and DORA, what are you seeing? Are organizations actually in the right place? Are they developing the right requirements? What does that look like? Are we behind? I guess we say in the States, we say, are we behind the 8 ball? Are we late to the game? Or are organizations taking this more seriously than what I'm experiencing?
I think your observation is absolutely accurate. Quite often when it's about compliance with new regulations, quite a lot of companies are starting that journey to get compliant rather late from a timeline perspective. And we are basically halftime now. So it was coming out in January 2023, needs to be implemented until January 2025. So we are basically halftime. And for the companies that have not yet started, obviously it's going to be intense 2024 with addressing all those requirements. And as said, they are refined constantly and getting more details around that, which is also a challenge for many of the institutions that have already started with it. So it shouldn't be underestimated how long it takes. And for the ones that have not yet started, and this is still absolutely a lot of financial institutions that have not really started with those projects, it's really getting rather late if they are not really beginning now early 2024 with doing that.
Yeah, it's interesting that you and I both, I guess, have the same experience of seeing organizations just a little come into the game a little bit too late on this. And so that's why it's important for us to have webinars like this and also kind of accelerate it through, the work that you're doing and the consultations that you're doing. One of the things that I always think about too is I always like to simplify things. How can I make things as easy as possible, right? None of this is real easy, but there's things that we could be doing. if I need to be compliant with DORA and NIS2, are there other regulatory demands that I could be covering with DORA and NIS2? And do they kind of overlap in some things? So I don't have to double my efforts. Are there some, some components of that where if I'm working on it, I can cover both DORA and NIS2?
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe they are not exactly named the same, but if you look at NIS2, then you see the supply chain risks basically that need to be addressed, which is quite heavily overlapping with third-party risk management. Even if it's a different term, it's similar concepts behind that. And especially also for the financial institutions that are not just operating in the EU, they are used to follow also the regulators outside of the EU. So obviously with DORA 2, it shall be the framework by the formal regulators going forward for this operational resilience and cyber resilience, so including insurance and banking regulators in the EU. But you still have national regulators, especially in the countries which are not under EU laws, be it UK, be it Switzerland, be it Singapore, be it in the US, and many financial companies are obviously operating in different countries. And if you have local regulations that are taking care of operation resilience, you might already have addressed some of those elements which are also relevant for NIS2 and DORA, and vice versa. If you are following now the regulations of DORA, you're probably also covering some of the national supervisory requirements that you might find in those different jurisdictions.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really important for people to be aware of. You don't to stop doing things like in silos. It's something that we talk about at Tanium all the time, is giving data to organizations so that across the entire environment, people can be working from the same set of data so that they're, working together. I think it's the same thing with these, regulatory demands of our organizations, that we look at them in as much detail as possible and then see where they overlap, see how we can simplify, basically going after these and making sure that we are compliant. So I really appreciate that, Tom. And one more final kind of thought is, as Tom was saying, obviously he has a lot of insights into this, but take advantage of what's up on the screen here. If you have any questions, get some time with Tom. Reach out to myself as well. EY has the ability to do a lot more when it comes to DORA and NIS2 than a company like Tanium. Tanium, we can deliver a lot of the data, give you a lot of the insights, but EY understands how all of that then comes together in the bigger picture of DORA and NIS2, because it's not all technical. A lot of it has not anything to do with technology. So take advantage of that. Tom, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate chatting with you. I appreciate you taking the time to do this with us. And any final thoughts or anything before we go?
That was a perfect summary. Thank you as well, Zach. It was a pleasure. And looking forward to many additional discussions on that topic. This is not going away, and probably is making a lot of businesses busy also in 2024 then.
Yep, I agree. Thank you very much, Tom. Have a great day, and thank you everybody for joining. Have a wonderful afternoon and a great week. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.